Part 2 of Leigh Janiak's Fear Street trilogy serves as a sequel, a prequel, and a setup for the conclusion. Like the title suggests, this one takes place predominantly in 1978, which was set up in the second act turning point of 1994.
It's not over. It's never over.
To recap where we are in the story, Sam successfully cheated death thanks to the old drown and come back with CPR loophole that a certain other cheerleader pulled off in the 90s. But that's far from the end, as she ends up cursed by a mysterious black-robed figure that turns her into a psycho the same way Ryan Torres went in the opening.
She makes the rules.
Who?
The only solution is to visit the one survivor of the last Shadyside massacre, the reclusive Ziggy Berman. She takes us back to the summer of 1978 at Camp Nightwing, where we follow two sisters, responsible stick-in-the-mud Cindy and rebellious ballbuster Ziggy.
Ziggy, that's enough. Maybe you're too scared to admit it.
Both are Bermans, and so we're warned.
A week later, my sister was dead.
1978 was a significant year in the slasher genre, because that was when John Carpenter's tiny little indie made for just over $300K turned into an unexpected $70 million hit, and resulted in plenty of other filmmakers looking for a piece of the pie. Slashers had been done before, and much better in certain areas, but Halloween changed the game much like Scream would later do, and as much as Friday the 13th was the poor man's knockoff, it does deserve credit for proving this was a bankable subgenre, for better or worse. So naturally, a setting in 1978 would contain several throwbacks to that era of slashers the same way 1994 did for the Scream era.
Hello?
Rather than the polished studio look in that film, 1978 has far more of an indie feel, with a lot of handheld cinematography and a minimalist aesthetic.
Why do you care?
For example, this one takes place over a 12-hour time span, meaning that there are almost no costume changes, and certain characters can drop in and out of the plot, reflecting how a lot of these films were influenced by cost-cutting techniques. Most of them wouldn't have a costume budget, and the actors would wear their own clothes, as they did in Halloween. And the low budget meant they could only have actors for a certain amount of time, which is the main reason The Evil Dead has Cheryl in the cellar and Linda lying down in the other room for a chunk of the runtime. The summer camp setting naturally makes everyone think of Friday the 13th, and indeed Nightwing Killer's costume evokes Jason in Part 2, but the camp being up and running and a bullying subplot seems more reminiscent of Sleepaway Camp.
She's a real carpenter's dream. The light is a board and needs a screw.
The voyeuristic shots in a few scenes are straight out of 70s suspense horror, which goes back to the minimalism of how these low-budget films had to rely on what the audience couldn't see. The level of nudity is actually quite in line with the first Halloween or Friday the 13th entries, and the characters themselves are less deliberately subversive and genre-savvy than they are in 1994, and are more throwbacks or reconstructions of certain archetypes.
We don't want to corrupt her virgin ears.
The most obvious is our co-lead Cindy, who fits right into the final girl mold.
Did Ziggy Berman just swear?
Not now, Tommy. Not in the mood.
Responsible, uptight, modest, and appearing delicate, but then having an inner strength that's brought out when faced with a psycho killer.
It's becoming a habit.
There's nothing fundamentally new on paper here, but the film uses its mythology to examine how a final girl might function in a world where it's not as simple as escaping the killer.
And I knew that. I wasn't different from the other Shadysiders.
And while I love 2010's horror overall, it's safe to say that the deconstructions and subversions of the final girl had been done to death. Pardon the pun. So I like that Fear Street pulls a reconstruction.
Next thing I know, I'm in the principal's office, and my dad can't come in because he just ran off with some girl not much older than I am now, and my mom, well, she was having a few drinks at O'Connell's.
Cindy's a straight final girl, but also has these backstory elements like wanting to better herself to escape Shadyside.
I told myself if I was perfect, if I did everything right, I could beat it.
You've already had to listen to me go on about Sadie Sink's work as Ziggy, and we will retread that ground, but we do need to praise Emily Rudd.
He made me feel like everything was going to be okay. I loved him. I really did.
Sadie Sink and Ryan Simpkins had the more colourful roles in this, and while I love their respective work, it's obvious that Ziggy and Alice would be much easier characters to play.
Stop screwing with mine and just do your jobs, please!
Cindy required the right blend of vulnerability, neurosis, and toughness, and Emily Rudd brought that. Also not hesitating to play this kind of character for laughs.
And I like fun, I just want to get out of Shadyside. Is that so crazy?
The gal has a future in comedy.
Oh, that's funny to you?
All in all, 1978 is less about in-your-face subversion like 1994, and more about finding clever ways to justify straight uses of tropes that we're so used to seeing deconstructed, the final girl included.
You're right, by the way. I am a snitch.
Alice also deserves a lot of praise.
The curse will last until body and hand unite.
Who else was like me and reacted to her first scene going, I know I'm gonna hate this character, expecting her to be among the first victims, and then being shocked not only when she lasted longer, but went through character development to be an important part of the story.
The curse will last until body and hand unite.
Like with Cindy in The Final Girl, there's nothing aesthetically different about Alice from the usual rebellious best friend you see in vintage slashers. She's particularly reminiscent of Annie from Halloween and Barb from Black Christmas. Young substance abusers, less feminine than The Final Girl, and with abrasive personalities. The difference is in how Fear Street frames Alice compared to how Halloween frames Annie.
Hey, jerk! Speed kills!
The latter is a nasty piece of work, and we're meant to see her as such. She belittles her best friend, neglects the little girl she's babysitting, and plans to let her friends fool around in someone else's house. The result is that, while her death is shocking, it's not as sad, and it serves as a warning for what could happen to Laurie, and therefore enhances the tension over whether this nice, likeable girl will make it.
Do as I say! Hurry!
Halloween is very critical of Annie and her bad behaviour, and her transgressions are what allow Michael to get the drop on her. Fear Street, meanwhile, is sympathetic to Alice, and offers up some in-story reasons for why a character might behave this way.
I watched my dad go to jail when I was 6. I watched my mom steal so I could eat. First time I cut myself, I was 12. It was after.
She's abrasive to the final girl because she abandoned her and sold her out in the hopes of a better life. She does drugs because her life is so empty, they're the only escape she has.
We all have our ways to deal with Shadyside.
And this time, when Alice dies, it does increase the tension over the final girl's survival, but in a different way.
I've waited my whole fucking life for this.
This character had just redeemed herself and found a way to break the curse, and then had her better future cruelly snatched away at the last minute. And it's probably the saddest death in the movie, and this is a story where little kids get butchered. Ryan Simpkins put a lot of extra effort into their character behind the scenes, and it definitely shows.
I watched your perfect boyfriend turn into a monster and kill the only person I've ever loved.
1978 overall delivers probably the most standout performances in the trilogy, which is probably the best way to segue to...
God, I hate that little bitch.
I already praised Ziggy Berman as one of the great underrated movie heroines in recent years, so I'll try not to repeat myself.
Maybe it was the witch. Ziggy. What, that doesn't fit your carefully constructed bullshit view of the world?
Between the All Too Well short film and Stranger Things 4 actually giving her something to do, it seems that 2022 is the year that Sadie Sink is finally getting the recognition she deserves. But us Fear Street fans knew better.
Why are you so full of shit?
While I stand by that Cindy was the harder role to play, that's not to say that Sadie doesn't deserve credit for how she made Ziggy work.
Should probably have Nurse Lane check that burnout.
No, I think I'm just gonna let it get infected and die.
This character could easily be just like Sheila by accident if the wrong actress was cast.
Only because Nurse Lane was the only person who was nice to me, and now her life is over because bad things always happen to Shadysiders.
With a character like this, you have a limited amount of time to get the audience to either like or understand them, and that's exactly what happens.
Since Dad left, since Mom started drinking, since we're going to lose the house.
We understand why this character would snap at authority figures only doing the bare minimum to help her, but have obvious concern to the one person that shows her genuine compassion, or why she would delight in punishing her bully in quite a nasty way, but then think to rescue her from actual danger. Hell, in this powerful scene between the sisters, we side with both Cindy and Ziggy, because we can understand where both sisters are coming from.
So when things go bad, you just want to explain it away.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to blame everything on some fairy tale.
I also just love these scenes between Nick and Ziggy, where you can practically feel the latter falling in love.
Would you ever kiss the weird girl?
And the pride in her voice as she refers to herself as...
The weird girl from Shadyside?
Unlike, say, with Florence Pugh in Midsummer, there's no moment where the film goes, let's Sadie show she can act. There's no big crying scene. There's no intense yelling.
But someday, it'll be you. And this whole fake bullshit life of yours is gonna come crashing down.
The most dramatic we get is this low decibel argument between the sisters early on, and the lead up to a kiss at the midpoint.
When my dad was around, my mom was happy.
So it's just a complete performance from beginning to end, and she deserves every bit of praise for it.
Because that's what happens when you live in Shadyside.
Having watched this before seasons 2 and 3 of Stranger Things, I can say that the show really underused her until the 4th season, and I wouldn't be surprised if Leigh Janiak was like, see, give Sadie more to do next time.
That's what they say.
I think what also resonated about Ziggy with me is that this kind of character you never see in a 70s or 80s slasher. The final girl is meant to be either delicate or responsible, and Ziggy is neither. And with her surrounded by more obvious archetypes from that era, it almost serves to make her feel even more like a misfit.
How could I ever repay you? Oh, I know, I'll just bat my eyes at you, like all the other dumbass girls.
Ziggy is incongruous with the type of film she's in, which seems to go hand in hand with how the film announces that she's going to die right before the title card, or so we think.
My sister was dead. And so was I.
I can't really talk more about this film without giving away 2 big twists, both for this and 1666. So if you don't want spoilers, fast forward. The film announces that one of the sisters will die at the Nightwing massacre, and the survivor telling the story just being known as C. Berman, and the resemblance between Gillian Jacobs and Emily Rudd spells out that it's Ziggy who dies.
Wait, here's Ziggy?
How well that worked is up for debate, since I see many people claiming they guessed it ahead of time, but I was a sucker and spent the whole film believing Ziggy was doomed and feeling very sad because of it. So the twist that she survives actually got me. And FYI, the flashbacks we see are not literally what she's telling in 1994. There is information that it's impossible for either Cindy or Ziggy to know in certain scenes, so what we have here is called a third-person flashback, where the audience is shown what actually happened and you can infer that it's not 100% what the narrator is telling. So can we put to rest the she was telling a 2-hour story in the third-person stuff?
And no one believed me.
The other big twist comes in 1666, where the reveal is that the Good family has been maintaining the curse for centuries. So Nick was the one who cursed Tommy.
I know I've let a lot of people die tonight.
Nick, this isn't your fault.
But not you.
Not only are there a lot of fun rewatch bonuses in 1978 once you know this twist,
Jesus, man. Did you do this?
it also adds an interesting spin to the subgenre it's a throwback for.
Look what you did to him!
The first wave of slashers at their core boiled down to morality tales, and usually served as warnings to not do X or Y would happen.
The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned.
In most slashers, the horror is caused by or tied to some kind of transgression, and it's such a remembered part of the storytelling that Cabin in the Woods says,
They don't transgress, they can't be punished.
And that was made in 2009.
They have to make the choice of their own free will. Otherwise, the system doesn't work.
Halloween is the defining example.
I think about lots of things. Now, why don't we not stand here talking about them and get down to doing them?
Annie's transgression is slacking her babysitting responsibilities to go and fool around with her boyfriend, also allowing Linda and Bob to do the same in the Wallace house.
So why don't you just walk over?
You come and pick me up.
Annie isn't killed until she transgresses, and her actions only cause the deaths of unsympathetic characters, since the young children and Laurie survive the night. Friday the 13th likewise all happens because a disabled 8-year-old drowned while 2 camp counselors were doing the devil's tango. A Nightmare on Elm Street is the result of parents taking the law into their own hands. The House on Sorority Row and Prom Night are all caused by the cover-ups of accidental murders. You get the picture by now. So 1978 retroactively subverts all this morality once you know that Nick is the one causing the massacre.
Nick! We forgot Sheila!
Ziggy's most selfless moment comes when she realizes that Sheila is still locked in the outhouse and risks her life to help her. But of course we later discover that only Shadysiders are ever targeted by this curse. So Sheila was never in any danger, and if Ziggy hadn't done the right thing, she would have left on the bus with the others, with it being likely that Cindy and Alice might have lived too. Gary trying to help the girls gets him decapitated for his troubles, and even Nick's act of choosing to bring Ziggy back from the dead screws him over in the long run. But the most tragic part of all...
You bled on the bone. They're after you. Get ready to run. No, Cindy, no! No!
Ziggy gets targeted by all the past Shadyside killers, and Cindy tries to fight them off to give her a chance to get away, knowing that the killers will only attack anyone protecting their target. Because Ziggy is killed and then revived immediately by Nick, her sacrifice is pointless, and that makes it all the more tragic.
She sacrificed herself for nothing.
And speaking of tragic, how about this scene? I feel like this moment is the one that stuck with me most out of the whole trilogy. It's extremely brutal and relentless. Some slashers from this time period can turn the ending into a bit of a slog, dragging out the final girl trying to hide from the killer, but this is the fitting climax for an already well-paced movie.
I wish I had stayed dead.
Who would have thought that a throwback to the schlockiest period in horror history would give us such a heart-wrenching conclusion?
Where's my sister?
All in all, 1978 is easily the best film in the trilogy, and it's the one I was looking forward to the least, since 90s period pieces are my jam right now, and we all love a good period horror. And it's even more surprising that it was entry number 2 that had to introduce an entirely new set of characters to carry the story, and we fell in love with Ziggy immediately.
The weird girl from Shadyside.
Leigh Janiak wasn't even supposed to direct this one at all, and only had to step in at the last minute, even saying she didn't have as much prep time as with the other two. But since this was the last one to be filmed, obviously it was a well-oiled machine by that point.
Please, let me do my job.
It's definitely the one that made me properly fall in love with this franchise, and it's always the one I'm most excited for new viewers to watch. And I'm starting to notice that 1978's loving throwback to a period of horror I was never that wild about is starting to make me reconsider my attitude towards it. I mean, I watched Friday the 13th Part 2 afterwards on Friday the 13th that year. May have accidentally disturbed someone trying to do meditation in the other room, but that's another story. Fear Street 1978 is the thing I didn't know I needed in my life, giving me plenty of inspiration for my own future film pursuits, introducing me to the talents of Sadie Sink, and delivering scenes that successfully haunt and thrilled me. But we still have one more twist in the tale, as we find ourselves in the 1600s next time around.
For Arnie. For Tommy. For Shadyside. For Shadyside. For Shadyside.